Good morning and welcome to our herb class today, designing your own herbs. You should have your container, the oval container, and 4 herbs. You should have a thyme, a rosemary, a lavender, and a sage. And you've got your soil. So we're going to get going right away. And I'll talk with you about some things during the class here. So if I can get my soil open. Here. Okay, I'm going to start by dumping in the soil and filling the container about halfway. This is a black gold all-purpose soil. It'll be just fine for this. Now, the herbs that we're planting today like full sun, which means 6 to 8 hours of light. So I've got the container about half full. Then I'm going to take the packet that was supplied to you, and this has Soil Moist and a slow release fertilizer in here. We'll mix this into the soil. The slow release fertilizer will feed the plants up to about June. So about June, you'll want to water with a water soluble fertilizer. But if you've seen any of my classes, you know my rule is never fertilize anything that's thirsty. So always remember to water first and then come back in a couple of hours and add a water soluble fertilizer, a good drink with that. And then I always recommend to dilute the fertilizer a little more than they say. So if it says a tablespoon in a gallon, I use about 3/4 of a tablespoon in a gallon so that I can fertilize more often with less fertilizer. Okay, so I have stirred in, basically mixed in the Soil Moist and the fertilizer. Then I'm going to determine where I want my plants. So my sage is going to get big. I'm going to put it to the back here. The thyme could creep over the edge a little bit, so I'll have it more to the front. This is the roasting rosemary that I have, and the lavender. So they can go about like that. So now that I've got it planned out, I'll begin to plant them. I always reserve my tags. They have some helpful tips, and some of them even have a bit of a recipe for the plant, for the herb. So to get it out, just give it a little bit of a squeeze. This one is well rooted, and it is starting to what I call bound. It's root bound. So you lightly loosen those bound roots. You don't want to pull them away and harm the roots. You just want them to not be turning or spinning around at the bottom. Okay, so this one is pretty good to go. Now, I'm going to turn it that way because I want them all facing that way. As you're using your herbs, continue to pluck off some leaves, and use them with fresh herbs. Remember not to use more than 1/3 of the plant at a time. This is the rosemary. I'm going to want this towards the back. This one's not root bound at all. It looks really, really good. So I'm setting these on top, but I want to keep the soil height of the herb just below the lip of the pot. So might have to dig it down in just a bit. Okay, then I'm going to take my thyme and I'm going to move it more to the front of the container so that if it begins to trail, so it's just lightly root bound, I'll loosen those up just a bit. Give it a little bit of a hole so that my soil height is right there near the top. When you're planting these herbs, don't change the soil height. Be sure that your soil goes to the same height that the plant is in the pot. Not too deep and not too shallow, at the same soil height. And then my last one is my lavender. So these plants, again, they're sun-loving herbs. They're going to need at least 6 to 8 hours of light. If you're going to leave them indoors, you're going to want to have a nice plant light or a very sunny window to put them in. That one's a little high. I want to get it down in there just a little more to keep it at the same soil height as the other plants. Okay, so I've got them placed. Now I'm going to take handfuls of soil and tuck in around them. These are also plants that don't like to be too wet or too dry. So you just have to check them daily. If you can get that first knuckle of your finger in and it's dry, it needs to be watered, but you don't want it to be too wet. So be sure that you have nice drainage. You don't want to set it somewhere where this pot can't drain. So it's got some drainage holes right on the edges of the lip at the bottom. Okay, so I just lift my bottom leaves carefully and get these planted in. There are other herbs like parsley and a few others that like more water, but these happen to be Mediterranean herbs and they like to get a bit drier. So once you get these planted, you'll want to water this pot really well for the first 2 days. Make sure it's nice and moist, and then not water for 2 days. And what that does is cause the roots to reach out looking for water, and they become established in the soil. Okay, give it a good tap. Make sure that there's no air pockets. You want nice, even soil at the top, right at the soil height that the plants were in the pot. Okay, nicely settled in. Oh, the herbs smell so good. Set my pots aside. I have reserved the tags to save for reference and with the little bit of a culinary suggestion that they've given you there. So the soil moist will absorb some water. So if you have to go away for a weekend, water it really well on Friday. And when you get back Sunday evening or Monday, it should be just fine. And again, your slow release fertilizer will feed it until about mid-June. And then you want to start giving it a water soluble fertilizer. So your pot is planted. Again, water well for the first 2 days and then let it dry out for the next 2 days. And after that, check it with just the finger method where you put it in and you've got your, if it's dry, water it, and if not, let it sit for a bit. So 6 to 8 hours of sun. Be sure to keep plucking the plant, not more than a third at a time, but by using the plant, it encourages it to continue growing. If you see one of them start to go to flower, pluck the flower off or let it go to flower for the pollinators. At that point, it doesn't taste as good as an herb. So if you want to continue using it through the season, just pluck off the flowers and let it continue to grow that way. And that is it. If you have any questions, be sure that you type them in. Otherwise, you have a nice herb container and you're ready to go. No questions? Okay. Well, enjoy your herb planter and we'll see you again at our next Mill and Feed planting class.